Thanks, Sal. Yeah, this is a tremendous crowd. I'm really honored to see you all out tonight. I don't think I've seen a crowd this big since I went to Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson concert, but I promise not to take a sweaty bandana a la Willie Nelson and toss it into the crowd here unless there's a big call for that. I imagined if I had named my book The Bonfire, the Siege and Burning of Kalamazoo, I probably wouldn't have such a big crowd out here tonight, but I'm glad to be in Atlanta, and it's wonderful to see you here. And it's also great to be back at the Atlanta History Center. I spent several wonderful weeks here. This is an amazing institution, and you should be very proud to have such a place in your town. They have a beautiful collection that is just a scholar's dream, and I only wish that I'd had more weeks to spend there. Now, I'm sure people in Atlanta know that there's a very significant event coming up, and to my mind, it may well be the most significant event in American history. You, of course, all know what that is, don't you? Well, this September 2nd is the 145th anniversary of the fall of Atlanta in 1864. On that day, the Confederates departed. They blew up a munitions train, and which caused an enormous amount of destruction in the city. And although Sherman takes the blame for Atlanta's burning, this was, in fact, the first great bonfire. And you remember that scene in Gone with the Wind where those great siege victims, those Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara, are racing through the flames and the falling embers. And that was, in fact, as presented in the movie, was that first great bonfire caused by the departing Confederates. Now, you might ask, why is the fall of Atlanta the most significant event in American history? Why would I say more so than, say, Independence Day or the fall of the Battle of Gettysburg or the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt or VE Day or VJ Day? Well, the fall of Atlanta meant that the Confederacy's heart had been pierced. Northern peace Democrats, who had hoped to have a negotiated settlement to the war, were finished. Lincoln would win a second term. And all but the diehard Confederates understood that the war was over. There was 8 months more war to be fought, but when Sherman would make sure that the Confederates who were diehard would indeed die. His march to the sea, departing from Atlanta, at which he set off the second great bonfire of Atlanta, would begin in the following November, and that was merely an exclamation point on the defeat of the Confederacy marked by the fall of Atlanta. That meant the United States would continue to be one nation. The night of Atlanta's fall, a dinner took place here in town. I'd love to have been sitting at the table. Mayor James M. Calhoun, who had been the mayor of Atlanta for most of the Civil War, who was a cousin of John C. Calhoun, the philosophical bedrock of Southern states' rights, who James Calhoun was a slaveholder. He was the father of a badly wounded Confederate captain who fought in the trenches at Vicksburg and against Sherman's army in the north of Georgia, a man whose own nephews from Atlanta were killed in Virginia in the fighting. That night, when the Confederate army moved out and the Union army moved in, he had dinner with Lieutenant Colonel Charles Morse and Captain Newton Comey of the 2nd Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment. They were the provost marshal and the captain of the day who'd moved into Calhoun's City Hall office. The Yankees were shocked to learn that the mayor opposed secession. And I'm sure the mayor was equally shocked to discover that these men hated the siege shelling of the city, which had gone on for the past almost 40 days. That dinner, to my mind, marked the beginning of the possibility that out of the Civil War, out of all that blood-soaked ground, one nation, permanent and indissoluble, would truly emerge. Now, the story of Atlanta, which is so central to the story of the Civil War and the story of the United States, has been plagued by too many myths in the popular imagination. We can thank that in part to Margaret Mitchell and the Xanax Gone with the Wind. Those myths of a genteel city of belles and cavaliers, of a solid Confederate nation protecting an enduring social order, of docile slaves, and then later on self-serving carpetbaggers, came down to us through the years. And those were just a few of the myths that I stumbled over in writing this book. Now, I'm getting ahead of my story here. I came to Atlanta the same way millions of people do. I flew here. It's the world's busiest transit hub. That was predicted when a former site, once revered by the Cherokee and Creek Native Americans as the center of the cosmos, was surveyed to be the terminus of a government-owned railroad. You could call that the earliest government stimulus project that created Atlanta. It was destined to be a transit hub from the start. It was a place in which goods coming from the Mississippi Valley could be shipped across Georgia and out to the coasts, and coastal goods could be shipped to the west. And of course, the trains that eventually found their way through Atlanta, the 4 major rail lines that ran through Atlanta during the Civil War, still cross in the center of Atlanta. You can hear the trains, see the trains all the time running through here. Like most people coming to Atlanta from the outside, I came here on business. As a historian, I wanted to take some time to look around and see where the Civil War had been fought here. And I was surprised to find there was very little evidence remaining from the Civil War period. In fact, there was almost none. There were a few trenches in Grant Park. North of here, at probably the best close-in place to find evidence of the war, the Kennesaw Mountain Battlefield is there. And many Atlantans I know tell me stories about growing up in the city and finding Civil War relics in their backyard. Where I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, history is so palpable. I could ride my bike over to Fort Stevens and see the spot where Abraham Lincoln had nearly been shot during Jubal Early's raid. It was a short drive to go up to the Antietam or Sharpsburg battlefield. Same with Manassas. And it really wasn't but a day trip to get up to Gettysburg and any number of other places. And then within Washington itself, of course, there's so much evidence of the history that was the Civil War. Here it seemed that truly it was all gone with the wind. So I began to wonder where it had gone. And I realized I needed to look beyond the absent brick and wood. I needed to look at the real lives as lived.